This video is going to be very exposing. This is something that many people don't talk about or don't like to talk about. And because people choose not to talk about this or are afraid of talking about this, it's actually a big reason why many relationships fail nowadays. And we have false expectations of relationships. So when expectations aren't met, the relationship ends, or people get hurt, or people get heartbroken. And so I want to talk about the very real dark side of men. Now, when I say the dark side of men, I'm not talking about the extreme behaviors. I'm not talking about those abusive behaviors. I'm talking about the dark side of men in regards to their vices. What is a vice? A vice is a behavior that someone does that pertains to them indulging in the dark side of who they are. And my aim today is to help you as a woman understand why men do certain things that may be seen as counterproductive to a long-term relationship, that a lot of the time end up hurting women either directly or indirectly. And I promise you that when I say if most men could change this about themselves, they would. So, in order for you to understand, I need you to apply this concept to every human being. We all have a light wolf and a dark wolf inside of us. You, me, and every human being on this earth. Feeding the light wolf is doing positive things, doing favors for family, spending time with friends, making the right decisions, being of service to others, telling the truth, doing things that are very much conducive to love and light. But we also have a dark wolf inside of us. This is where our self-serving desires come from, whether that's lust, money, status, drugs, attention, validation, recognition. That's the dark wolf. And we all have both of these sides in us. And our vice is food for our dark wolf. When we are indulging in our vice, that is us feeding the dark wolf inside of us. And this is why I truly believe most relationships and marriages fail today. I think many of us make the mistake, and what people try to do is that they say, oh, I am only ever going to feed the light wolf inside of me. And they try and make this promise in life. They try and make this promise to their partners. And the truth is, I don't believe that is sustainable. In fact, I think what we're showing is that it is not sustainable, at least over a long period of time, let alone a lifetime. We think that if we don't feed that dark wolf inside of us, that if we starve the dark wolf that we have, that eventually it will just die of starvation. And that is the biggest mistake I believe we make. The dark wolf never dies, just like the light wolf never dies, because each of them are part of us. And so what happens is when you try to starve the dark wolf for too long, it comes back with a vengeance. The vengeance is aggressive, it is destructive. The truth is, we have to feed our dark wolf every now and then because it keeps it tamed and keeps it at bay. And I believe that part of developing a good relationship with life, but especially with your partner, is figuring out how do you feed your dark wolf while mitigating as little damage as possible to others. Because the dark wolf does and will get hungry, and it will try to demand you to indulge in your vice. And this is what I mean. I have noticed that for almost 99% of men that I've seen, that I've met, that we observe in the world, I've noticed that their vice is always one of these 5 things: drinking, gambling, women, drugs, or fighting. That's why, for example, when we go, oh, why does he always feel the need to go to the pub and go drinking with his friends all the time? That's him feeding his dark wolf. Or we go, oh, he can't help himself but do a line of coke every other week. That's him feeding his dark wolf. Or when we go, oh, he can't help but be sleeping with multiple women and being sexually intimate with them all the time. Or when we go, oh, he's sleeping and being sexual with multiple women. That's him feeding his dark wolf. Or he can't help but go to casino and always put money on black, or playing blackjack and gambling. Or I don't know, every time he goes out, he can't help himself but seems to always get into a kind of fight or some kind of altercation. Feeding the dark wolf. You get the picture. Now, women have a dark wolf too. And from what I've noticed, many women's vice, what their food for their dark wolf is seeking attention, validation, emotional manipulation, bringing down other women that they see as competition, whether that's to do with status or to do with men or to do with accolades. That's why a lot of women find when they enter the workplace, they find that their biggest competition and biggest hurdles aren't men, but it's actually other women trying to get ahead of them. They experience other women being emotionally or socially vicious to them in the workplace if she perceives you as a potential threat. Now, the reason this is very exposing for us and why this is really important that we start to have this conversation is because relationships just are not working out. Marriages are not working out. And a big reason for this is because people, but especially men, make a promise to women that they will never feed that dark wolf, that he will never feed that dark wolf inside him again. And what happens is when that dark wolf has been starved long enough, it comes back with that aggressive vengeance. And this principle applies with anything in life. Like, let me give this example. Let's say we have somebody who's trying to change their diet, right? They're trying to get into better shape. And let's say they have a sweet tooth, okay? They love the sugary snacks and sugary sweet things. I'm going to cut out sugar entirely, right? I'm not going to eat any sugary thing or any sweet things at all moving forward. That's what I'm going to do to change my diet. But as we find out, this approach hardly ever works. Why? Because they may last for 2 to 3 months, but then they'll have that craving. The dark wolf inside them will be hungry for its vice. And then they find themselves relapsing. They go on a sugary binge for a few days or even a few weeks, and they just undo all the work they've done to get there. You can't just go cold turkey on something, which is why it's way more effective and way more sustainable that if somebody does have a sweet tooth and they're used to indulging in sugary foods all the time, instead of just trying to cut it out of their diet, they eat clean from Monday to Friday and then give them one day on the weekend where they can have a sugary snack. They give themselves permission to feed that dark wolf just a little bit. And it is proven that that person makes more of a difference in their fitness journey. It is way more sustainable and it is way more adaptable. I believe an issue of why a lot of marriages fail is because women have an expectation of men to never feed that dark wolf, and men make that promise. And trust me when I say, men truly believe themselves in the moment when they are making that promise. They truly believe they can go the rest of their lives without ever having to feed that dark wolf again. We live much longer nowadays. We don't live in times where marriages would only last between 6 to 9 years. Like, let's take on the most common thing, a man cheating. He's got a loyal, beautiful woman at home, but yeah, he cheats, right? If a man's vice was having sex with multiple women, if that was the food for his dark wolf, this isn't saying that he's always going to be looking to indulge in that, but it gets to a point where the hunger and the starvation gets stronger. And so when that reaches certain thresholds, he is more likely to be crazy and reckless, which is why he now starts to have an affair. He goes on a wild one. Maybe he gets another woman pregnant. And of course, the family is heartbroken. And I just want to be clear, this is not justifying any cheating or lying or lack of integrity. I'm just helping you as a woman understand. What people learn in real life through the pain of these kind of situations is that you cannot starve your dark wolf forever. And so I believe this kind of conversation has to be had between couples if they're going to last as long as our grandparents have. If men and women are truly serious about being in each other's lives for the rest of their lives. But any relationship that's going to be lasting longer than 3 decades, we have to have the conversation of, okay, what is the food for your dark wolf? And how do we manage that over the decades that we are going to be together? Now, this isn't me saying that, oh, if a man's dark wolf is taking drugs, then every Sunday we let him go on a sniffing spree. But it's about understanding what is the dark wolf that he has, and as a woman, what is the dark wolf that you have? Because I think for a lot of men, they do recognize today that for many women, the food for their dark wolf is validation and attention, especially online. And this is why a lot of guys in particular have an issue with their girlfriend posting sexy, provocative photos, especially if she's in a relationship with him. Posting sexy, provocative stuff online when she's in a relationship is looking for that dopamine hit, that validation, that attention. That is her feeding her dark wolf. How many times can I say dark wolf in this episode? But it is for many women, which is why, of course, many women combat the idea of well, I'm going to continue to be posting sexually provocative stuff online, even if we are together. So you as the man, you have to accept that. This is why I've always said that the body count of a man is something that a woman should care about. Because what it shows is if a man has a high body count, if he slept with many women, that indicates that the food for his dark wolf is sexual promiscuity with multiple women. One thing we all have to come to terms with is that it is way too accessible and easy to feed our dark wolf today than it has ever been before. And a big reason why we didn't have to worry about this as much back in the day is because there was little to zero accessibility. Men and women were limited to the people in their village, where the internet didn't exist. So if we take a woman's food for her dark wolf was validation and attention from other men, and men's was, sexual promiscuity with other women, the men in her village weren't likely to give her validation because they could only ever do it in the open. We didn't have the internet or silent messaging. And since they would likely know and respect the man, the husband, they were less likely to do it. And for the man's side, the women in his village were not likely to be going around sleeping with him because of the shame it would bestow upon her and her social circles. And we know that having a social community is a much higher priority and value for women than it is for men. Whereas now we have Instagram, OnlyFans, where it is literally designed to deliver validation and attention. While at the same time, we have a casual sexual hookup culture where not only do we not have guilt or shame with sex outside of marriage, but we even celebrate having casual sex. We celebrate having hookup culture because it's quote unquote empowering, which directly feeds into the dark wolf side of many men. Now, I'm not saying that we should go back to attaching shame to sex and, delete all social media, though deleting social media will probably be a net positive for very many people. I'm just laying out the landscape, how it is now and how much it's changed. I think we really underestimate that. A really big reason why people behaved better back in the day wasn't because they didn't want to indulge in the behaviors that were bad for relationships, but it's because they couldn't do that. They weren't allowed to. The consequences were too big. The temptation for casual sex today is unlike anything it's ever been before, and it's way easier to entertain other options secretly than it has ever been before. All of this isn't just more accessible, but the culture we live in is constantly encouraging and pushing us to feed the dark wolf in each of us. It profits off of it. So in order to succeed and evolve, we have to adapt to the environment. And part of adapting and evolving into the current environment is beginning to have these kinds of conversations. We have to be able to talk to our partner and say, how do we maintain our dark wolf on a diet that doesn't destroy the relationship? It's going to take emotional intelligence, a lot of emotional maturity, and we have to be able to put our egos to the side. And for anyone watching this thinking, this can't work, I'm never going to discuss my man entertaining his dark wolf, or I'm never going to discuss my woman slightly feeding her dark wolf either. This is what I ask you. Is what you're seeing in today's dating and relationships, is it working out well for us right now? I truly believe that a big part to why we're failing in this area is because we're not addressing one of the fundamental things about being a human being. Hey, if you think I'm crazy, tell me I'm crazy, but I want to know what you think. Thanks for tuning in. And as always, keep it slick.